When you recover, pack your bags and move into a cheap motel? My mother sneered, tossing a $500 check onto my hospital blanket. I was 5 days postpartum holding my newborn son, and my husband had just died in a warehouse fire 48 hours ago. My father and my smug brother-in-law stood by, demanding I sign away my dead husband's tech company before I was even discharged. I did not cry. I did not beg. I simply pressed a single button on my phone. They thought I was a weak, grieving widow. They forgot what I do for a living. When the hospital room door swung open and 3 federal agents walked in, my father actually tried to run. My name is Julia. I am 33 years old. If you have ever had your own blood try to strip you down to nothing when you were at your most vulnerable, hit that like button and subscribe. Because the revenge I took on my family was not just sweet, it was a federal offense for them. The sterile smell of bleach and rubbing alcohol hung heavy in the maternity ward. I sat in the narrow hospital bed, my body aching from an emergency cesarean section, cradling little Leo against my chest. He was so small, so fragile, and completely unaware that his father Thomas would never get to hold him. Thomas had died 2 days ago when his company warehouse mysteriously went up in flames. My heart was shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces, but I was not allowed to mourn. My family had made sure of that. The door to my room had opened 30 minutes earlier, but it was not the nurses checking my vitals. It was my parents. Richard and Brenda, followed closely by my younger sister Nicole and her husband Kendrick. There were no flowers. There were no words of comfort. There was only business. My mother Brenda stood at the foot of my bed adjusting her designer scarf. She looked around the modest hospital room with undisguised disgust. She reached into her expensive leather handbag, pulled out a check, and let it flutter down onto my lap. It was for $500. She told me to take it, go to a motel, and figure out my life because I was no longer their problem. My father Richard paced near the window, constantly checking his luxury watch. He did not even look at his newborn grandson. He just nodded in agreement with my mother. "You need to be realistic, Julia," he said, his voice cold and clinical. "Thomas is gone. His little tech startup is literally ashes. Kendrick is doing you a massive favor by taking this legal nightmare off your hands." Kendrick stepped forward. He was a towering African-American venture capitalist, 35 years old, always impeccably dressed in custom-tailored suits. He had built a reputation in the corporate world for being a ruthless shark, charming when he wanted something and devastatingly cruel when he did not get it. He pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase and dropped them onto my rolling tray table. He clicked a gold pen and held it out to me. "Sign the equity transfer, Julia Kendrick," said his deep baritone voice dripping with false sympathy. "Your husband's company is bleeding money. The warehouse burned down. The servers are destroyed. I am offering to liquidate the remaining assets and give you a clean break. If you refuse, my legal team will simply file a motion declaring you mentally unfit to manage financial assets due to severe postpartum trauma. You will lose the company anyway, and with a psychiatric hold on your record. You might just lose custody of little Leo here." I stared at the pen, then up at his perfectly composed face. He was threatening to take my baby if I did not hand over my dead husband's life work. Nicole stepped up next to her husband, crossing her arms. She was the golden child, the one my parents had always showered with praise and resources while treating me like an afterthought. "Just sign it," Julia, Nicole said, rolling her eyes. "It is not like you have ever put up a fight before. Remember when Mom and Dad emptied your college savings to pay for my destination wedding? You cried for a day and then quietly went to a community college. You let us turn your old bedroom into Kendrick's home gym without saying a word. You are weak. You are a follower. Just sign the paper and take the $500. They looked at me with absolute certainty. They saw the quiet, compliant scapegoat they had bullied for 33 years. But they had fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I did not go to community college to disappear. I went to become a forensic accountant. While Nicole was busy spending my college fund on champagne towers and Instagram photos, I spent the last 10 years working alongside federal agencies, tracking laundered money, dismantling shell companies, and hunting down white-collar criminals. I did not just look at numbers. I looked at the crimes hiding behind them. And for the last 3 weeks before Thomas even died, I had been quietly auditing his tech company's financial records. I gently placed Leo into his clear plastic bassinet beside my bed. I picked up the gold pen Kendrick had placed on the table. Kendrick smirked, assuming he had won. I looked at my father, who was already reaching for the doorknob, eager to leave this unpleasant environment. I am not going to a motel, I said, my voice completely steady. And I am certainly not signing away my company to a man who steals from the dead. Kendrick's smirk vanished. His eyes narrowed. Excuse me. I dropped the pen onto the floor. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and pressed a single button on my speed dial. I looked right into Kendrick's eyes. You think Thomas's company is worthless because the warehouse burned down. But I know that $15 million was siphoned out of his operational accounts exactly 4 days before the fire. I know the money was routed through a Cayman Islands offshore account. And I know that account belongs to your venture capital firm, Kendrick. The blood drained from my mother's face. Richard froze, his hand trembling on the doorknob. Nicole opened her mouth to scream at me, but she never got the chance. The heavy hospital door swung open with brutal force. Special Agent David Mitchell, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, stepped into the room holding up a federal badge. He was flanked by 2 armed, uniformed police officers. Richard took one look at the FBI badge, let out a panicked gasp, and actually tried to run. He shoved past the first police officer, sprinting for the hallway. He made it exactly 3 steps before the second officer grabbed him by the shoulder and slammed him face first into the linoleum floor. The sickening thud of my father hitting the ground echoed through the sterile room. Kendrick stepped back, bumping into the tray table, knocking his expensive coffee onto his polished Italian leather shoes. His corporate composure completely shattered as Agent Mitchell locked eyes with him. What is the rush, Dad? I asked, leaning back against my hospital pillows, staring at the pathetic man pinned to the floor. You are going to miss the best part. I have not even told the FBI about the fake consulting invoices you and Kendrick used to drain my husband's accounts. Agent Mitchell pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The game is over, he said, his voice echoing in the chaotic room. Richard Miller, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud. And Kendrick Hayes, I suggest you call your lawyers. We have a lot to talk about regarding a missing $15 million. My father hit the linoleum with a heavy thud, gasping for air as the officer pinned his arms behind his back. The sharp click of metal handcuffs echoing through the maternity ward was the most satisfying sound I had heard in days. My mother let out a shrill shriek, dropping her designer handbag and clutching her pearl necklace. She lunged forward, her expensive heels slipping on the polished floor, screaming that this was a mistake, that her husband was a respected businessman. Agent Mitchell did not even blink. He held his badge higher and instructed his officers to read my father his rights. Kendrick, however, did not panic. He was a venture capitalist who thrived in high-stakes boardrooms. He simply took a slow breath, brushed a few stray drops of spilled coffee off his custom suit jacket, and pulled out his phone. He looked at Agent Mitchell with the kind of condescending glare usually reserved for unruly employees. You have made a catastrophic mistake, Agent Kendrick said, his deep voice smooth and dangerous. I do not know what kind of postpartum delusion my sister-in-law has sold you, but you are currently assaulting a prominent citizen based on the ramblings of a grieving woman. I am calling my legal team right now. By the time I am off the phone, your career will be over, your badge will be in a shredder, and this entire hospital will be slapped with a massive lawsuit. Agent Mitchell crossed his arms, completely unbothered by the threat. He glanced at me, waiting. This was exactly how we had planned it. I adjusted my grip on my sleeping newborn son and looked straight into Kendrick's eyes. You can call your lawyers, Kendrick, I said, making sure my voice cut through the noise of my mother's crying. But you should probably tell them to bring a defense for federal wire fraud, international money laundering, and corporate embezzlement. Kendrick let out a harsh, arrogant laugh. Embezzlement. You are literally insane, Julia. Thomas ran his own company into the ground. He was drowning in debt. The warehouse fire was just the final nail in the coffin of his failures. I felt a flash of pure rage at the mention of my husband's name coming from his mouth, but I kept my face entirely blank. Thomas was not drowning in debt, I replied, my voice turning to ice. You were. I know about the margin calls on your venture capital fund. I know your biggest investors were threatening to pull out last month. And I know exactly how you decided to save your own skin. You think because I stayed quiet at family dinners taking my parents' insults that I was just some clueless housewife. You forgot my actual job. Nicole scoffed from the corner of the room, her arms crossed defensively. Oh, please, you are just a glorified bookkeeper. You look at spreadsheets all day. I am a forensic accountant, Nicole. I corrected her sharply. I track dirty money for federal agencies. I dismantle shell companies for a living. I hunt financial predators who think they are smarter than the system. And for the past 3 weeks, I have been hunting your husband. The room suddenly went dead silent. Even my mother stopped her hysterical sobbing to stare at me. Before the fire. Before Thomas died, he asked me to look into some discrepancies in his operational accounts. I continued keeping my eyes locked on Kendrick. He thought it was a banking error, but it took me less than 48 hours to bypass your encrypted firewalls. I watched the money move. $15 million siphoned out of Thomas's company in small, untraceable increments over the last 6 months. The funds were funneled through a series of dummy corporations in Delaware, bounced through a crypto exchange, and finally landed in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Kendrick's posture stiffened. The arrogant smirk on his face completely vanished. An offshore account registered to a holding company named Apex Innovations, I said, enunciating every syllable. The exact same holding company that technically owns your luxury estate, your sports cars, and the private jet you love to brag about. I handed all the routing numbers, the IP logs, and the transaction timestamps directly to Agent Mitchell yesterday. Agent Mitchell stepped forward, pulling a folded warrant from his jacket pocket. We have already frozen the Cayman accounts, Kendrick. We also have a federal judge's signature to seize your firm's domestic assets, pending a full investigation. Now you can put the phone away, or you can join your father-in-law on the floor. Your choice. My mother let out another wail, pointing a trembling finger at me. Julia, you are a monster. How could you do this to your own family? Your sister is going to be ruined. You have always been jealous of Nicole. Ever since you were teenagers, you tried to sabotage her. You are making all this up just to destroy her marriage because your own husband was a failure. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing but disgust. I am not making anything up, Mother. I am just providing the math. Numbers do not lie. Unlike this family. Kendrick finally broke his silence. He held up a hand silencing my mother and put his phone to his ear. He spoke in rapid, hushed tones to someone on the other end. I watched the muscles in his jaw clench. He was a cornered animal, but a cornered animal with endless financial resources. Within minutes, a highly coordinated legal maneuver was unfolding. Kendrick's lawyers were apparently already on standby. They had reached out to a federal magistrate, arguing that my father's arrest in a maternity ward was a gross violation of protocol and demanding a temporary injunction on the immediate detainment until a grand jury could be convened. It was a dirty, expensive legal trick, but it bought them exactly what they needed: time. Agent Mitchell's radio buzzed. He listened for a moment, his expression darkening. He looked at me and gave a tight, frustrated nod. The fix was in, at least temporarily. Mitchell ordered his men to pull my father up from the floor, uncuffing him, but issuing a strict warning not to leave the state. Richard rubbed his bruised wrists, glaring at me with pure hatred. "You are dead to us," he spat. "Do you hear me? You are no longer my daughter." "You stopped being my father the day you helped steal my husband's life work," I replied evenly. "Get out of my room." Nicole grabbed my father's arm, dragging him toward the hallway, shooting me a venomous look over her shoulder. But Kendrick lingered. He walked slowly toward the side of my hospital bed, leaning down so close I could smell the expensive cologne and stale coffee on his suit. Agent Mitchell took a step forward, but I held up my hand to stop him. I wanted to hear what Kendrick had to say. Kendrick leaned in until his lips were inches from my ear. His voice was a harsh, sinister whisper, meant only for me. "You think you are so smart playing detective with your little spreadsheets," Kendrick murmured. "But you are out of your league, Julia. Freezing those accounts means nothing. The $15 million is already washed clean through legitimate venture capital investments. It is untouchable. And as for the embezzlement, you are forgetting one crucial detail." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy between us before delivering the final crushing blow. "Thomas authorized those transfers. I have the signed executive orders. His signature is perfectly authentic, verified, and legally binding. He signed the money away willingly. You cannot prove fraud if the CEO approved the transactions himself. By the time my lawyers are done spinning this, your dead husband will look like a corrupt businessman hiding cash, and you will look like a crazy, vindictive widow. You played your hand too early. You have no money. You have no company. You are going to be homeless widow. Enjoy the motel. Kendrick straightened up, buttoned his suit jacket with a sickeningly calm smile, and walked out of the hospital room, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that the war had only just begun. The hospital room felt completely suffocating after Kendrick walked out. I did not waste time staring at the blank walls or shedding useless tears. I had a 5-day-old baby to protect and a brutal war to win. The nurses helped me pack my few belongings, casting sympathetic glances my way. They had heard the shouting. They knew my own blood had just tried to destroy me. I ignored their pity, signed my discharge papers with a steady hand, and strapped little Leo into his car seat. The ride to the house Thomas and I had bought 3 years ago was a blur of gray skies and silent determination. The house was a beautiful modern craftsman-style home in a quiet tree-lined neighborhood. It was the place where we had painted the nursery together, where Thomas had assembled the crib just a week before the fire took him from me forever. I paid the driver, hoisted the heavy car seat onto my arm, and walked up the familiar stone pathway to my front door. The winter wind was sharp, and I pulled the blanket tighter around Leo to shield him from the cold. I pulled my keys from my purse and slid the deadbolt key into the lock. It did not turn. I pulled it out, wiped the metal on my sleeve, and tried again. It hit a solid metal block inside the mechanism. The lock was brand new. The deadbolt clicked from the inside. The heavy wooden door swung open, but it was not a locksmith standing in my foyer. It was my younger sister, Nicole. She was wearing my plush white bathrobe, holding a steaming mug of coffee from my expensive espresso machine, looking at me with a sickeningly sweet smile. "Hello, Julia," she chirped, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You are home early." "What are you doing in my house, Nicole?" I asked, my voice dangerously flat. "It is not your house anymore," she replied, taking a slow sip of coffee. "Thomas missed the last 2 mortgage payments. Did you know that? He was bleeding cash trying to keep his failing company afloat. The bank was getting ready to foreclose. So my brilliant husband swooped in, bought the debt directly from the lender, and expedited the deed transfer. Kendrick owns this property now. And since you are technically a squatter, I am giving you your formal eviction notice." I stared at her, feeling the cold wind biting at my face while I stood on the porch with my newborn son. She was enjoying this. She fed on my misery. She thrived on seeing me stripped of everything I loved. "You always let me take what is yours," Julia Nicole mocked, taking a step closer to the threshold. "Just like when Mom and Dad gave me your entire college fund to pay for my destination wedding. You barely said a word back then. You just packed your cheap little bags and walked away to that sad community college. I am taking this house now. It has better natural light anyway. Now get off my property before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." She expected me to beg. She expected me to break down crying on the welcome mat, pleading for a warm place for my baby to sleep. She wanted me to fall to my knees and surrender to her superiority. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I shifted Leo's car seat to my other arm, pulled out my phone, and made one phone call. I did not call the local police. I called William and Catherine Bennett, Thomas's parents. My in-laws were the exact opposite of my flashy, loud, status-obsessed parents. They possessed quiet generational wealth. They were fiercely loyal, deeply private, and they loved me like the daughter my own mother never wanted. It took exactly 20 minutes. Nicole was still standing in the doorway, taunting me about my clothes and my dead husband, when 3 black, heavily armored SUVs rolled down the quiet suburban street and completely boxed in the driveway. The doors opened in unison. William and Catherine stepped out, followed instantly by a team of 6 massive, unsmiling men in dark suits. These were not local cops who could be bribed or intimidated by Kendrick's corporate status. This was the Bennett's private corporate security team, composed of former military contractors who only answered to William. Nicole's smug smile vanished instantly. She gripped the doorframe as William Bennett walked up the steps, his face carved from absolute stone. "Excuse me, you cannot be here," Nicole stammered, her voice suddenly high-pitched and nervous as the men approached. "Kendrick owns this property. You are trespassing." William did not even acknowledge her existence. He looked at his lead security guard and gave a single sharp nod. The guard stepped forward and physically shoved past Nicole, pushing her hard against the wall to clear the path. "Hey, you cannot do that!" she shrieked, stumbling backward in my oversized bathrobe. Catherine Bennett walked up to me, her eyes completely ignoring the pathetic display my sister was making. She reached out and gently took Leo's car seat from my tired arms. Her gaze met mine, filled with a fierce, terrifying maternal protection that my own mother had never once shown me in 33 years. "We have you, Julia," Catherine said softly, her voice carrying the weight of an absolute promise. "Let them work." I turned to the security chief. "Upstairs, second door on the left. I do not care about the clothes, the jewelry, or the furniture. I need the 2 black fireproof server towers under the desk and the biometric hard drives hidden in the wall safe." The team moved with swift military precision. They did not waste time packing my sweaters or my photo albums. They packed my encrypted servers. They packed the massive digital footprint of my entire forensic accounting firm. They were retrieving the exact tools I needed to financially dissect Kendrick's life and burn his empire to the ground. Within 10 minutes, the heavy Pelican cases were loaded securely into the trunk of the lead SUV. I climbed into the back seat next to Catherine, who was gently rocking little Leo to sleep. William took the front passenger seat, signaling the driver to move. Nicole was furious. Her ultimate power trip had completely failed. She had been swatted aside like an annoying insect by people with real, untouchable power. As the SUV engine roared to life, Nicole ran down the driveway, waving her arms wildly, her face red with absolute rage. "Enjoy your stupid hard drives," Julia Nicole screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice piercing through the thick, bulletproof glass of the SUV window. "You think you are so smart. Go ahead and check Thomas's $5 million life insurance policy. You are not the beneficiary anymore. It was routed to me." Nicole's shrill voice faded into the distance as the heavy bulletproof windows of the SUV rolled up, sealing me inside a quiet, secure sanctuary. "Enjoy the hard drives." Thomas's $5 million life insurance policy was routed to me. Her parting words bounced around my head loud and sharp, but I did not panic. I simply looked down at my sleeping son. She thought she had delivered a fatal blow. She had no idea she had just handed me the exact thread I needed to unravel her husband's entire operation. The drive to the Bennett estate took 40 minutes. We passed through dense snow-dusted pine forests before reaching a set of massive wrought iron gates. William Bennett did not have to say a single word to the armed guards stationed at the entrance. They recognized the vehicle and immediately granted us access. The estate was a sprawling stone mansion surrounded by acres of private land. This was what real power looked like. There were no flashy sports cars parked out front, no loud, desperate displays of new money. It was just absolute impenetrable security. Catherine guided me inside, gently taking Leo up to a fully prepared nursery she had quietly arranged the moment she heard Thomas had passed. William led me to a mahogany-paneled study on the ground floor. The security team carried my black Pelican cases into the room, setting them down gently on the heavy oak desk. They plugged in the independent power supplies and connected a secure hardwired internet line to the wall port. William looked at me, his eyes dark with the exact same grief that weighed heavily on my chest, but his posture was rigid with resolve. "The house is locked down, Julia," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "No one gets through those gates. Find what you need to find. Burn that bastard to the ground." I nodded. Once the door clicked shut behind him, I went directly to work. I opened the Pelican cases, booting up my dual server towers. The cooling fans whirred to life, a comforting and familiar sound in a world that had completely turned upside down. I bypassed the standard commercial operating systems and booted directly into my custom forensic analysis software. I needed to see exactly what Kendrick and Nicole had done with my husband's life insurance policy. I logged into the central portal of the insurance conglomerate using the master credentials Thomas and I shared for our financial planning. A glaring red notification sat at the very top of the dashboard. "Beneficiary updated." I clicked the secure link. There it was. My name had been completely erased from the primary beneficiary line. In its place, shining brightly in stark black text, was Nicole Miller Hayes. They had actually done it. They had hijacked $5 million meant to secure my son's future. A normal person would have called a lawyer to argue the change. I am not a normal person. I am a forensic accountant. I do not argue with customer service representatives. I argue with raw data. Every digital signature leaves a footprint, a trail of metadata that tells a precise story. I ran a script to extract the back-end source code of the digital signature form. Lines of green text flooded my monitor. I isolated the exact time and location data embedded in the authorization certificate. I stared at the timestamp. The electronic signature executing the transfer had been submitted on Tuesday at exactly 9:14 in the evening. I felt a cold chill run down my spine, followed instantly by a wave of white-hot anger. The first emergency 911 call reporting the warehouse fire was logged at 9:12. By 9:14, the warehouse roof had already collapsed. Thomas was trapped inside a blazing inferno, inhaling toxic smoke, fighting desperately for his life. It was physically and biologically impossible for him to be calmly sitting at a computer logging into an insurance portal and digitally signing a complex legal document to give his sister-in-law $5 million. But the timestamp was only the first piece of the puzzle. I needed the physical location. I ran a trace route on the IP address attached to the signature. It bounced through a commercial virtual private network, masking its origin by routing the signal through a dummy server in Frankfurt. It was a decent attempt at hiding, but Kendrick was a venture capitalist, not a cybersecurity expert. He used a standard corporate encryption key. I deployed a decryption algorithm I had acquired during a joint task force operation with the Treasury Department years ago. The software stripped away the fake routing data in less than 5 minutes. The true IP address appeared on my screen. I cross-referenced the geographic coordinates. The signature did not come from Thomas's warehouse. It originated from a secure fiber optic network located in the financial district of downtown Seattle. The registered owner of that network was Zenith Capital, Kendrick's firm. While my husband was burning to death, Kendrick was sitting in his corner office, using stolen login credentials to forge a digital signature and steal my son's inheritance. I did not hesitate. I compiled the IP logs, the decryption sequence, the official fire department dispatch timeline, and a detailed summary of the fraudulent activity into a single encrypted PDF file. I did not send it to the General Fraud Hotline. During a previous investigation, I had worked directly with the chief investigator of the insurance conglomerate's internal security division. I bypassed the corporate red tape and emailed the file straight to his private server, flagging it as an active federal crime in progress. My phone rang 10 minutes later. The chief investigator took one look at the geolocation data and the timeline discrepancy. He did not ask questions. He did not offer empty condolences. He simply informed me that the $5 million payout was immediately frozen. The policy was locked under a severe federal fraud investigation, and a team of corporate auditors was being dispatched to review Zenith Capital's IP logs first thing in the morning. Kendrick was expecting that money to clear by midnight. He needed that $5 million in liquid cash to cover the massive margin calls threatening to collapse his firm, especially since I had already exposed his offshore accounts to the FBI. Without that insurance payout, he was financially suffocating. His carefully constructed empire was running out of oxygen. 2 hours later, a breaking news alert flashed across my phone screen. Kendrick had realized his cash flow was permanently blocked. Realizing he could not reach me physically behind the walls of my in-laws' estate, he decided to drag the war out into the open. He was a master of corporate spin, and he was about to unleash a vicious, highly coordinated public smear campaign to destroy my life in front of the entire world. The next morning, the massive flat screen in the Bennett estate study illuminated with the local morning show. Kendrick had not wasted a single second. Leveraging his extensive venture capital media contacts, he had secured prime airtime on every major local network. I stood holding Leo, watching my own sister perform the greatest acting job of her life. Nicole sat on a plush studio sofa dressed in somber black, wiping perfectly timed tears from her eyes. The host leaned in with manufactured sympathy, asking how the family was coping with the tragic warehouse fire. Nicole looked directly into the camera and delivered a masterful, calculated lie. "She is not in her right mind," Nicole sobbed, clutching a tissue. "My sister Julia is suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. She has completely lost her grip on reality. Thomas was trying to get her psychiatric help right before the fire. She was acting so erratically, so violently. I honestly believe her negligence is the reason my brother-in-law is dead." I felt Catherine, my mother-in-law, stiffen beside me, her grip tightening on her coffee mug. But the broadcast was not over. The camera panned outward, revealing my parents, Brenda and Richard, sitting rigidly on either side of Nicole. They were playing the roles of heartbroken, terrified grandparents to absolute perfection. Julia has always been dangerously unstable, Brenda told the host, her voice trembling with fake emotion. When she was 18, she had a terrifying violent breakdown just because we asked her to move out and become independent. We have spent years trying to get her mental health treatment. Now she is holding our newborn grandson hostage and making up delusional conspiracy theories about our family to cope with her guilt. She is a danger to herself and that sweet baby. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Brenda was taking the moment she kicked me out onto the street and twisting it into a narrative of my supposed insanity. Richard chimed in next, looking solemnly into the lens. He announced that because Thomas's company had tragically burned to the ground, they were launching a public crowdfunding campaign. They called it Justice for Leo. They pleaded with this public for donations to help them mount a legal battle to rescue my son from my delusional custody and secure his financial future. Catherine slammed her coffee mug onto the table. I am calling our legal team, she said, her voice shaking with fury. We will slap them with a defamation lawsuit so fast it will make their heads spin. I shook my head gently, rocking Leo. Do not call the lawyers, Catherine. Let them talk. They just made a fatal mistake. I handed Leo to her and sat down at my dual server monitors. Kendrick was a shark, but he was a desperate shark. He needed cash immediately to cover the margin calls threatening to sink Zenith Capital, especially since I had frozen the $5 million life insurance policy. I knew he was not launching a charity campaign out of the goodness of his heart. I needed to see exactly where that money was going. I opened my forensic analysis software and pulled up the back-end data for the Justice for Leo crowdfunding page. Thanks to the emotional television broadcast, the campaign was exploding. The donation ticker was climbing rapidly, hitting $100,000, then $200,000, fueled by outraged and sympathetic viewers. I ran a trace on the Payment Gateway API. Every crowdfunding platform uses a routing number to deposit the collected funds into a beneficiary account. I deployed a decryption sequence to bypass the campaign's front-end mask. The destination account was not a protected trust for my son. It was not even a personal account belonging to my parents. The routing number belonged to the primary corporate operating account of Zenith Capital. Kendrick was using the tragedy of my husband's death, the existence of my newborn son, and a fabricated story about my mental health to scam the public. He was funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars from sympathetic strangers directly into his failing firm to keep his investors from pulling out. It was a brazen, disgusting act of wire fraud playing out on live television. A normal person would have contacted the crowdfunding platform to report the campaign. But taking the page down would only stop the cash flow. It would not punish Kendrick. I wanted to break him. I cracked my knuckles and started typing. Using a specialized network injection tool I had developed for tracking cartel money, I bypassed the platform's standard security protocols. I did not shut down the campaign. Instead, I accessed the payment gateway's hidden routing configurations. I highlighted the Zenith Capital account numbers and deleted them entirely. In their place, I inputted a very specific, highly restricted routing number. It was the direct deposit code for a locked federal evidence escrow account, controlled exclusively by the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I executed the override and locked the script behind a military-grade firewall. Kendrick was sitting in his glass office right now, watching that donation ticker climb toward $500,000, believing he had just secured the exact lifeline he needed to save his empire. He had already promised that incoming capital to his furious investors to cover his massive debts. He was banking his entire corporate survival on that money hitting his accounts by noon. What Kendrick did not know was that every single penny being donated was now flowing directly into federal custody. When he attempted to initiate the transfer, he would not just hit a zero balance. He would trigger an automatic, irreversible federal red flag on his firm, leaving him drowning in debt and completely exposed. He thought he was playing the media, but he had just handed Agent Mitchell the final nail for his coffin. Agent Mitchell watched the confirmation screen on my laptop glow bright green. The stolen crowdfunding donations were now safely locked behind a federal firewall, completely inaccessible to Kendrick and his failing firm.